Konrad Curze, primarch of the 8th Legiones Astartes, the Night Haunter, brother, traitor, martyr. Konrad Curze was fear made manifest. Raised on the planet of Nostramo, Curze grew to maturity alone, stalking the cold, bloody streets of its hives as a living embodiment of brutal justice, shaped by the violence and crime of his homeworld, along with the constant, horrific visions gifted to him by his foresight. He would come to see fear as the ultimate weapon of conquest. Sent out across the stars, he would slaughter thousands to save millions, becoming a twisted, brutal reflection of what a primarch should be. Ultimately, he would sacrifice his life to vindicate his ideals, allowing an assassin to take his head so that he might be sure of his own assumptions. A life wasted, placating the worst impulses and twisted desires a mind like that can conjure in the name of brutally noble ideals. Today, I wanted to show you how a world can break a primarch. Konrad Curze would begin his life like the rest of his brothers, an infant stuck in an artificial womb and sent across the warp, time, and space to land upon the planet of Nostramo. His landing so violent that it carved a deep fissure into the planet's adamantium-rich crust, through which the infant within crawled to freedom. The primarch child would emerge onto a haunted world. Nostramo was not a kind world. A hive world, the many tumorous city masses, sprawling and overwhelming in their immensity, were covered in a perpetual cloud bank of smog and chemical pollutants. This shroud of darkness covered the majority of the planet, allowing little light from their dying sun to reach the surface. On a good day, Nostramo could be as bright as a moonlit midnight. On the worst, darkness only found in the deepest cave systems would flood into every unlit passage and crevice, the inky blackness choking and thick. Nostramo was a world of misery and violence. Its population owned by the ruling elite, they were marked as property and forced to work in any number of factories, mines, or stores, toiling away for their masters. Where a slave acted against their master, tried to run away, disobeyed them, or pushed back at their tyranny, they would have their hands tattooed in Sinner's Red. Any human with Sinner's Red on their hands was a walking corpse, their life and death at the complete whims of their masters. They would serve, but if their master wished them to die at any time, for any reason, whether it be for amusement, for punishment, or just to send a message, they would die. Despite this, the population would attempt to eke out something of a normal existence. Within their cramped, dirty, and stinking habs, people would have families, raise children, and try not to be crushed by the thick blanket of misery that covered the planet. Most failed, seeing their sons become vicious gang members and murderers, serving the same masters as them. Their daughters become property owned by cruel men and women who would throw them away as soon as they became bored. Seeing their spouses become shells of their former selves, worked and beaten to the point of near death just to sustain the life that they had for themselves, would break most people, unable to justify continuing. Suicide was not illegal on Nostramo, and many would choose that path, a sick form of population control that ensured the streets weren't too crowded. Crime was rampant, with many thugs, murderers, and sadists employed by the ruling families as enforcers. They would be given free rein to treat the populace as they saw fit, robbing, beating, murdering, and assaulting anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. There was no safety, no shelter, and no protection from their whims, and the people would have to content themselves with carrying out their daily monotonous rhythm under the constant threat of violence. The ruling elite were no better. In the high peaks of the hives, they would play at royalty, taking the names of and styling themselves after the royalty of old Earth, taking titles such as Baron, Count, Lord, or Duchess. They would walk around the districts they lay claim to in packs of preening, arrogant sociopaths. Distinct types of aristocrat had emerged. The mirthless, white-faced and preening, the blade carrion clad in cloaks of tattered velvet, and the chatterers, their lips cut off to reveal teeth sharp as knives. Every gang on Nostramo would owe fealty to one of these aristocrats, who in turn served the head of their houses. Though styled after the nobility of old, they were little more than criminal overlords. Idols of fear, violence and extortion in periwigs and velvet gowns. This was the world that the infant primarch would emerge into. The world that he would eventually conquer, and the world that would break him in turn. Curze would grow to maturity within these haunted streets, not adopted by any family. Given no one to guide him, he would learn from his surroundings, and he would become little more than an animal, driven by a lust to kill and mete out sick justice on anyone that he saw deserving of it. Targeting those he saw as deserving of punishment, he would crucify, flay, and eviscerate them, placing them on display for all to see, instilling fear in every soul on Nostramo as he did so. Through this, he would take the title of Night Haunter, a name he would claim over his given name of Konrad Curze until his death. Throughout this, he would be assailed by prescient visions of might-be futures, shown the different paths of fate. Though in his growing despair and madness, he would be convinced that he had no control over his path, self-assured in the knowledge that there was no hope for a better future, no chance for control without fear and death, blind to the possibilities. He crept towards the lip of the roof and peered into the alleyway. The building was a tenement of ancient design. An older Night Haunter would have recognized the prefabricated sections as STC prints. He did not know that it had stood there for ages, the durable material barely showing the passage of millennia. It had been built upon a hillside in forgotten centuries, one of several dozen gradually swallowed by the hive. The ground was too unstable to support anything larger, so they had not been demolished, but remained while the area became a seedy district hemmed in by skyscrapers, the perfect hunting ground. 2 youths were in the alleyway, knives out, looming over a young female, about to do what heartless young males did to women 1,000 times an hour in the grim confines of the hive. They were street dregs, parentless and murderous. She was better dressed than they, of a higher caste. Whichever syndicate sheltered her people would seek these youths out and slaughter them for their temerity. It would not come to that. They were too busy cutting the clothes from their victim to see the Night Haunter drop from the roof behind them, ragged wings of cloth fluttering enough to give them warning if they were vigilant. They were not. They were too occupied with their sordid pleasure to pay attention to the soft footfall of his landing or the padding of his feet as he crept towards them, his hunched, cloaked form a darker shadow among the shadows. Their blood was up and they were laughing. The girl wept softly. They were loud and she was quiet because both parties assumed no one would come to her aid. The Night Haunter was close enough to smell the youths' unwashed bodies over the pervasive garbage stink. "Let her go," said the Night Haunter. A heavy strike broke 4 of Karzan's ribs and sent him back down. He managed to roll over before the thing was on him again, a huge, merciless hand snatching his feeble boy's arm away from the knife holstered at his side. A second hand encircled his skinny ribcage, pinning him to the roof. Karzan screamed and punched ineffectually at his captor. The Night Haunter leaned over into the blows, taking them on his angular face. Karzan punched and punched until his knuckles split. The Night Haunter did not so much as flinch. Panting, Karzan let his hand flop down to the roof. This was the Night Haunter, a pallid face of hard angles. Eyes as black as any Nostramen's glittered with an inhuman intelligence. Thin lips parted. Seeing how white and even his teeth were, Karzan saw his captor anew. He was filthy and stank with street living and careless murders. But under the grime, he was perfect, whispered the boy. The Night Haunter tilted his head, intrigued. The rain fell heavily, wet, reeking hair brushed against Karzan's cheek. Water, rusty with old blood, coursed from it. He saw himself, taken with a moment's doubt, a questioning of his assumptions that had him pause as the boy pushed himself backwards along the rooftop, and Night Haunter extended a saviour's hand instead of an executioner's blow. Hesitantly, the boy stopped. The boy reached out. The boy... Karzan. The name came to him from unrealized futures. The boy grew under his guidance. His horizons expanded beyond the criminal margins that had trammeled him. A life of good works beckoned. More killers taken from the streets and changed, like he, from murderers to mentors, by the spreading word of the Night Haunter. each transformed soul a little force to the lever of change, until, with rushing power, the rules of blood were scratched out and a new social contract took hold. For this, the boy thanked the Night Haunter, and he was loved for the change he brought. This happened. But this also happened. The Night Haunter saw himself, taken with a moment's doubt, a questioning of assumptions that had him pause as the boy pushed himself backwards along the rooftop, and Night Haunter extended a saviour's hand instead of an executioner's blow. The boy took his chance and rammed his knife hard into the Night Haunter's side, some fluke pushing it through the armoured box of his ribcage and into the meat of his primary heart. That would not kill him. It could not. But it hurt. Oh, it hurt. And the boy, Tarzan, same boy, different future. The boy lived. The boy prospered. His legend as the man who faced the terror in the dark grew and grew. A rise to power greased with blood. A climb to the heights of influence upon a ladder made of raw bones. 1,000 killings he committed, at first by his own hand, then at his command. And still it was not enough to garner all he craved. Money, power, women. 1,000 other lives paid taxes of blood to build his future. The Night Haunter was less feared because of the boy's escape. He was vulnerable. Death could be cheated. As fear lessened, his task became harder. By the time the man the boy had become was tracked down to his lair, many innocents had perished. "You made me," said the older boy in both visions, both as apostle of its gentler age and devil of its worsening hell. "You made me," said the grown man, through strangulation and through grateful tears, whether the same pale hands choked his throat or caressed his face. There can only ever be one future, thought Night Haunter. Only ever one. The kinder fate dimmed, obscured and extinguished by the darker. If, for a moment, the Night Haunter had stopped to turn these sights about in his mind, he might have apprehended the truth of choice, that both futures were valid, and favoured eventuality could be coaxed into being. But his sight was dark indeed. He saw only the need for immediate retribution. It was this moment that decided the rest of Konrad Curze's life. In submitting to the darker path, the worse fate, in allowing pessimism, predetermination, and fear to rule his life, he would ensure that it would be all he knew until his death. Too scared to hope for something better, to try to be better, he would seal his fate. At the beginning, he would simply choose those that he deemed to have done something wrong, but as his actions grew increasingly more violent, he would shift his focus to anyone that he believed to have transgressed. Corpses were found stuffed into drainage pipes, hung from buildings, crucified on walls, impaled on fences. Often, they were so brutalized that they could not be identified. And with each murder, fear of the Night Haunter would spread. He would be merciless in the application of his judgment. In truth, he enjoyed killing, enjoyed torturing and flaying his victims. The reality of the Night Haunter was no different to the countless murderers that stalked Nostramo's streets. The only difference was that Curze hid his actions behind a veil of justice. The Exchanger fans vomited up a column of stinking air into Nostramo's endless night. Blades pounded forever on squealing bearings, sucking up the fetid atmosphere from Nostramo Quintus's deep hive levels. Second-hand heat raised the temperature of the apartment to unbearable heights and packed it from wall to wall with a thick smell of overcrowded concourses and sweaty bodies, of malfunctioning reclamation centres and stale water. Over all, the stink of trash choked her, that rich, coppery smell that fills the mouth, so close to the scent of rotten blood. It never washed from her clothes. It never washed from her hair. That smell was one of a long list of things Talishma would not miss. She was leaving, and she was going in her nicest dress. Arjash's body had been taken from her to be recycled. All she had left of their life together, of him, were a few personal effects. She'd laid out his best suit of clothes on the bed. She thought it might be symbolic and that it would help. It did neither, for his clothes made a hollow outline far from the shape of a man. It was the best she could do. The lines of his face were blurring in her mind. The few pics she had didn't capture the way he looked in real life. Or maybe they did, and she was forgetting already. The fans roared on. Their single-room apartment had a solitary window. It was too hot in the summer to keep it shut. The noise of the fans demarcated their world, a wall of sound and smell that blotted out the city beyond. Lights on the next hab spire were a shimmering wash of colour, twinkling through the heated air. The grinding of ground car engines and the wail of the horns in the canyon street played second string to the chopping of their blades. As long as she could remember, the fans had delimited her world. She turned slowly, taking in every part of her small quarters. The broken folding door that led to the small laboratorial, the awkward cooking space jammed up by the entrance, the chair and the chest, the only pieces of furniture in the room besides the bed. The bed. She couldn't look at it. The bed where she had lain many nights with Arjash, content despite the song of the fans and their choking stench. The only place she had ever felt happy or safe. The bed that now waited for her body alone, where the clothes of her dead husband rested emptily. The fans didn't care. She couldn't stand it. She clamped her hands over her ears and stifled a scream. It was funny, given what she intended to do, that she didn't want to scream. Screams brought trouble. She craved a little dignity at the end. She sobbed quietly, saliva running from her mouth, her eyes screwed up so tightly they vanished. Her face swelled. She never looked her best when she was weeping. Arjash always said that, teasing her tears away. A laugh tried to rise at the memory. It choked off in strangled competition with her sorrow. She didn't hear the door. She didn't hear the slice of bladed fingers breaking every one of her locks with metallic snaps. Their apartment had been burgled many times. They had many locks. The door was scarred from battery, kicked in, bashed in, broken with hydraulic jacks. This stealthy entrance was gentle compared to the boots that had put the panels through, or the blowtorches that had reduced their first lock to a puddle of metal. Entrance was conducted with respect for the occupants, the intruder keen to inflict no more damage than was strictly necessary. She was still weeping and didn't see him when he bent double to pull his cadaverous frame through and stand, willowy yet hulking, with his inhuman head brushing the ceiling. But she did smell him. His pungent odour overcame the awful reek of the air exchanger, a heavy smell, redolent of death. Her sobs died. She took a hitching breath, removing her hands from her ears, and turned to face the creature that had come into her sanctum. She kept her eyes closed for several seconds, listening to him breathe, quiet yet audible over the thundering fans 100,000 lives depended on. "Night Haunter," she said, opening her eyes as she spoke the words. "I have come for you," Night Haunter said. His body was swathed in black rags stitched together from the garments of a dozen looted corpses. No tailor or Nostramo would dare outfit this nightmare. "Why?" she said. She was too drained to feel fear. The situation was surreal. "I have done nothing wrong. I have lived all my life as well as I could." "You did not dream of City's Edge." "Everyone dreams of City's Edge," she said, her voice small yet defiant. "I tried to make myself into someone who could go there. I failed, but I did no wrong in trying. I have never harmed anyone, or wished to. I have suffered life here without complaint. Why are you here?" Night Haunter's eyes glinted. "The manner of your life is not my concern. It is the manner of your death. The manner of death you have chosen is a crime." He took a step forwards, looming over her. "There were, in ancient places, laws against self-murder," he said. "Suicides were buried without ceremony, in shame, and those caught attempting to kill themselves were often executed." "But I want to die," she whispered. "Not the way I will end you," he hissed. "What I will do to you will make you wish you had opted to live. I am going to hurt you as much as it is possible to be hurt." "Why?" she breathed. "There are no taboos against taking one's life here," said the Night Haunter. "Many do. This is not a happy world, but it can be a better one. By killing yourself, you take the easy way out. You encourage others to do the same. You might think that you add yourself to a statistic, but your self-murder is much more than that. Every suicide adds to the rot, weakening your culture. Every life abandoned is a signal that change can never be effected. You throw your existence away, and in doing so, lessen the value of humanity." He reached out a hand and ran a ragged nail gently down her face. "I am going to save you. I am going to save you all. The people of this world will rise above this station of beasts. I will make them, if I have to bathe in the blood of you all to make that happen, then so be it. Justice is my purpose. The only route to total justice is fear. Without fear there can be no order. You will suffer now to feed that fear, so many others will live, and this decaying society take the slow road to salvation. He pulled out a long knife he had made himself. It was unlovely, a murderer's blade, but with it he could carve the most excruciating agonies. "Wait," she said. The blade hissed through the air. "Do not try," he said. "You plead for something you have already forfeited." The first cut parted the skin on her arm, shoulder to little fingertip, no deeper than the dermis, for he did not want her hide to tear when he ripped it from her living body. It was so swift a movement, the blade so sharp, she did not feel it. Her first unbelieving gasp of pain only came when the blood pattered to the floor. She clutched her arm, her hand hopelessly unsuited to the task of closing the wound. She began to cry again, this time from fear and pain. Curze grinned. "You do not wish to die any longer, I can tell. That is unfortunate, but it must be done." He advanced on her. "Feel joy that your death will bring justice to this world. Feel joy that I bring order." He cut again. This time she screamed. A droplet of warm, wet red dotted his cheek. He fought the urge to lick it off. He must be sober and serious. "I assure you, I do not enjoy this at all." His heart quickened at the lie. As his legend grew, crime on Nostramo would drop to near zero. His methods, though vile, had a marked effect on the populace. The Night Haunter became a figure of legend, spoken in hushed whispers and told to children as a warning against staying out at night. A self-imposed curfew would emerge, with only the most vile beings stalking the streets at night, easy pickings for the growing primarch. Clad in dirt, dried blood and soaked rags, he would continue his reign of terror, eventually confronting the surviving nobility of Nostramo in person and crowning himself as Nostramo Quintus's first king. By the standards of Nostramo, he was a fair king. Though he would indulge in his base desires whenever he heard of some crime or wrongdoing, he would become more like his brothers over his short rule, assimilating knowledge and using his prescience to guide Nostraman society to what he saw as a better future. The other cities on Nostramo followed suit under the threat of evisceration at his hands, beginning a new age of honesty, efficiency, and fear. It would not take long for his father to find him, however. As the Great Crusade entered the Nostramo system, Curze would prepare to meet his father. 4 primarchs would accompany the Emperor to meet his newfound son, Fulgrim, Rogel Dawn, Lorgar, and Ferrus Manus. Together, they would greet their wayward brother, followed by the Emperor himself, his light so bright that it blinded all that gazed upon him, their black eyes burning in their sockets. But as the Emperor greeted his son, he would be afflicted by a vision so terrible that it forced him to his knees. It was waiting for them. The army ceased as one, every single one of the 250,000 soldiers standing motionless in the same moment. The 4 giants stepped forwards. The blazing god led them. The first demigod, clad in rough gold, inclined his white hair head in majestic acknowledgement, a king greeting an equal. "I am Rogel Dawn," he said. The Night Haunter said nothing. In his mind's eye, he saw the giant die, dragged down by 100 murderers in a dark tunnel, their knives and swords wet with warriors' blood. The second giant wore armor of patterned grey, etched with 10,000 works, as if a scholar had taken a quill to stone. He nodded his shaven, tattooed head, likewise inked with scripture, the lettering gold upon the tanned skin. "I am Lorgar Aurelian," he said, his voice a hymn where Dawn's had been a measured, stately demand. "We have been seeking you, brother." There was sorrow in his otherwise kind eyes. Sorrow at the dark city, its unhealthy people, the obviousness of their colourless, exhausting lives. Again, the Night Haunter said nothing. He saw this warrior crowned in psychic fire, screaming up at a burning sky. The third giant wore armour of riveted, dense black. His arms were solid silver, yet contoured and moving as living limbs. His voice was the steely grind of a foundry's bowels. "I am Ferrus Manus," he said. His eyes were dark, but not cold. The Night Haunter remained silent, seeing the warrior's head clutched by its empty eye sockets in another man's armored fingers. The last giant wore armor painted the violet of an alien sunset. His hair was silvery, long and elegant. He alone smiled, and he alone met the Night Haunter's eyes with warmth in his own. "I am Fulgrim," said this last lord. "It is good to finally meet you, brother." The Night Haunter still said nothing. He saw this final giant in only the faintest of images, always slithering and laughing, never entirely visible. The god stepped forwards, his arms open wide. He drew breath to speak. The first syllable struck the Night Haunter with the force of a spear through the heart. He went to his knees, gasping for breath that wouldn't come, saliva stringing from his bared teeth. Blood ran from his burst heart just as it gushed from his cut throat. His grasping hands had no hope of stemming the flow. His whole life rushed out in a liquid torrent, burning his cold fingers, images of murder hammering against the back of his eyes. He felt a hand on his head. The pain died in a pulse, restoring his sanity in a moment of mercy. His throat wasn't cut. His heart hadn't burst. The Night Haunter looked up to see the golden god, faceless and ageless, resolve into the image of a man. The man-god's face could have been the face of any male of any one of a million worlds. It was all men, all at once, the apotheosis of man. "Be at peace, Konrad Curze. I have arrived, and I intend to take you home." The Night Haunter reached up to rake this sweaty hair back from his gaunt features. "That is not my name, father. My people gave me a name, and I will bear it until my dying day." He rose to his feet, unwilling to kneel. "And I know full well what you intend for me." Curze would join the Great Crusade and be gifted a legion just as all of his brothers had. He would take his ideology of fear out into the dark and forge his new legion in his image, renaming them as his Night Lords. To these demigods of war, he would preach his ideology, not of fear as the end itself, but using fear as the means towards that end. To Curze, people were simple. Humans had to be ruled through fear to follow the rule of law. Without fear of consequences, they were little better than animals in his mind. And he would teach his sons to think like this. He would preach that fear was a tool to be used, never to be enjoyed despite his own feelings. They would be cold, calculated and merciless, but never find enjoyment in that mercilessness. They would flay women, children and men alike to save the countless millions that might die in open warfare, but must never take joy in it. By doing so, in his mind, they would win victory by spilling as little blood as possible. It was merely the way that it was spilled that would ensure his enemy's defeat. A world that saw one of its cities massacred, flayed and strung up on display would capitulate quickly, the fear of that fate befalling them too great to resist. In this way he would ensure that they stayed loyal, the threat of the consequences of rebellion too great to ignore. But this ideology was flawed from the outset. Fear of consequences lasts only as long as those who would enact punishment loom overhead, and without Curze's knowledge, the ruling elite had taken back control of Nostramo, the lack of fear in his absence allowing them to push it back into the gorge of depravity that it once festered in, basking in their regained power. The shroud of fear only lasts as long as the threat remains, and once Curze had left, there was no longer any threat of punishment as long as the Legion received the supplies that it needed. Like a corrupted blood transfusion, the toxic society of Nostramo would soon begin to infect the Legion too. The elite would no longer send their best, no longer allow their brightest suns to be turned into unfeeling weapons of war. Instead, they would send the dregs, sadists, rapists, and bloodthirsty killers from the deepest pits of Nostramo's prisons, their sick desires following them into ascension, revealing the Night Haunter's ideology to be the farce that it was. They would become horrific spectres of fear, covered in flayed skin, projecting the screaming faces of their victims on their armor so that their kin might hear them die 1,000 times over. "No," Curze drenched the single syllable in regret. "No, you don't understand. I've never claimed to be perfect, Servitor, but I became the sinner, the monster, the Night Haunter, so that my people would never have to. And look at the result. Look at the recruits from Nostramo. Less than a decade after I departed. Look at the filth they sent me. Look at the disgusting dregs of humanity my own apothecaries infused with my genetic material and reforged into transhumans. The Eighth is poisoned, Sev. Generations of men who are murderers in my image, yet devoid of my conviction. They are killers and abusers because they want to be, not because someone had to be. The end result is the same, said Sevatar. Fear is the weapon. Fear is supposed to be the means to the end. Look at the bloodshed my legion has wrought these last years. Even before the crusade was done, fear became the end itself. It was all they desired. They fed on it. My sons were strong, so they bled the weak for their own amusement. Tell me, Captain, where the nobility is in that. Where is the nobility in any of this? Sevatar gestured to the streets of Nostramo, Quintus around them. You can claim a savage nobility, father, but this is far more savage than noble. Curze's pale lips peeled back from his filed teeth. There was no other way. No? Sevatar answered his father's snarl with a grin. What other ways did you try? Sevatar! Answer me, father. What politics of peace did you teach? What scientific and social illumination did you bring to this society? In your quest for a human utopia, what other ways did you try beyond eating the flesh of stray dogs and skinning people alive? It was the only way. Sevatar laughed again. The only way to do what? The only way to bring a population to heel? How then did the other primarchs manage it? How has world upon world managed it, without resorting to butchering children and broadcasting their screams across the planetary voxnet? Their worlds were never as serene as mine was. And the serenity of yours died the first second your back was turned. So tell me again how you succeeded. Tell me again how this all worked perfectly. Over time, the Night Lords would lose even the guise of pragmatism that covered their actions. Their legionaries would enjoy the flying, doing it for no other reason than to simply inflict pain. They did not use it as a tool to achieve victory or ensure compliance. They did it because they liked it, and nothing more. Eventually, after Curze came into conflict with Rogel Dawn over the visions that he saw, Curze would vow to solve the issue of Nostramo once and for all. Slaughtering the Templar Brethren and Phoenix Guard that kept him secluded, Curze would escape with his fleet to Nostramo, eager to enact a final judgment. Bombarding the planet, the Night Lord's fleet would crack their homeworld apart, killing billions in an act of brutality that would shake the Imperium. Some Night Lords would rebel against this, attempting to save their world, but all were brutally put down by Jago Sevatarian and his first company. Even then, though, Curze knew that his sons had been corrupted by Nostramo. Its sickness transferred to them, the Legion became one of depraved killers rather than honourable warriors. When the heresy would come to pass, the Night Lords would throw in their lot with Horus. Their first act of barbarity came at the Dropsite Massacre, where the Night Lords, Word-Bearers, Iron Warriors and Alpha Legion would arrive under the guise of reinforcements, only to cut down their former brothers as they retreated towards their lines. On the killing fields of Istvan, the 8th Legion would blood itself, the blood of the brothers they slew wetting the path that they continued to slide down. Through all of the betrayal and blood that followed, Curze would degenerate entirely. The Night Haunter would allow himself to indulge in his darkest habits more and more. His chambers aboard the Nightfall, his personal Gloriana-class battleship, would become an abattoir, coated in gore and the remains of his victims. Sometimes they were enemies, often they were simply crew unlucky enough to be noticed by Curze. This habit would spiral out of control by the time that the Legion settled on Segualsa, their final home. Talos walked down the central pathway, boots thumping on the black stone, while the floor either side of the walkway rippled and tensed with the tendency of human expression. Eyes, noses, teeth, and tongues poking from open mouths. The ground itself was a carpet of faces flesh crafted together, kept alive by grotesque, baroque blood filters and organ simulator engines beneath the floor. As an apothecary, Talos knew the machinery well. He was one of the few charged to maintain the foul ambience within the screaming gallery. Robed servitors monotasked for the duty sprayed gentle bursts of water vapor into the blinking eyes blanketing the floor, keeping them moist. Throughout this degeneration, he would hold to the rightness of his principles, though. Too afraid of what it would mean to be wrong to ever admit it, he would stick to the path he had chosen for himself with dire certainty, seeing vindication in the eventual fate he would meet. Through the Thramas Crusade and his conflict with the Lion that would almost spell his end, all the way to Ultramar as a stowaway on the Invincible Reason, where he would attempt to murder his brothers on a number of occasions. Throughout all of this, he would maintain that his fate was certain, and that his death at the hands of his father held the vindication that he sought. Eventually, he would find his way to the world he would die on, Segualsa. Here, he would wait, slowly falling further into madness. His sons would join him there, erecting a great fortress through slave labor. Secluded in his chambers, alone, he would build an effigy to his father from bone and sinew, an idol that he could spill his roiling mind to, or simply someone that he felt he could talk to. Eventually, in a moment of either sheer madness or genuine connection, he would speak to the emperor he had built, his pain, guilt, and doubt spilling out, overwhelming him. Here, he was given his final judgment. A sense of pressure building before a storm pressed the air in the room to an uncomfortable thickness. From out of this roared the thunder of words that Curze had yearned for, yet in the last sane pocket of his mind had never expected. "You are not weak, my son." The voice drove Curze to his knees with its power. His head rang with sudden, white pain. A roaring hurricane of might blasted from the figure, now surrounded with actinic light, tossing the remains of his victims around and burning out the wall, exposing Curze to the light of the hateful stars. "Father," he said. His voice was fractured, small, like a child's voice, pitiful. "I am beyond your accusations, beyond speech, beyond anything. Why do you think that I speak? Your madness is finally complete." Again, the words rang Curze's skull with the force of a clapper striking a bell. Still, he managed to grin and raise his head to stare at the meat thing's glory, though he was forced to squint against the blazing light. "No, no, you are here. I hear you. You have come to face my judgment, drawn by this offering I have made. You were ever a bloody god." "I am no god, nor shall ever be." Curze got back up, his feathered cloak whipping in the psychic gale, his book clutched protectively to his chest. "You are here. You understand your guilt. You have come to face my judgment." "You cannot condemn me. I am punished enough." "There is not enough punishment for what you have done. Not in this life, or in the next," shouted Curze. "How dare you presume to understand what I have done, and what sacrifices I have made, and what I now must suffer?" The force of the voice battered Curze back. "You will never know the depths of my pain, for which I am grateful." Curze opened his eyes to peer sidelong at the figure. "Why such hollow words?" The voice took a moment before it returned, again with thunderous force that made Curze howl. "No father wishes his sons to suffer, no matter what burdens he is forced to place upon them." Curze laughed. "An apology? What next? You will forgive me? Sanguinius warned me you might," he scoffed. "There was never anything to forgive. You acted as you were made to, but my plan was interfered with. Your insanity was not your fault, nor was it mine." Curze snarled like an animal. "Lies! Everything was as you intended." "There is nothing you have done wrong. If only you and I could have met one more time, I could have shown you back to the light." "How marvelous!" Curze fell into a minute of wild, howling laughter. "I am the Night Haunter. Light is anathema to me." "Light is within you all. You are my sons. You are born of light. None of you are beyond redemption." "Tell that to those who died." "Nothing ever dies. Death is a state of transition. You have my forgiveness, Konrad, whether you want it or not." "Never." The voice in his head would not relent, but pounded mercilessly on. More masonry fell from outside the wall. The floor collapsed behind him, frittering into its constituent atoms. You made but one mistake, my son. From it, all the evil you have perpetuated springs. You chose to believe in immutable fate. Without choice, there is nothing. These gods that taunt us rely upon choice. The functioning of this universe depends upon choice. A single fate is one book in a library of illimitable futures. You read only one. Do you not see that you chose this? You chose to be fate's prisoner. Had you believed in your own agency, none of this would have come to pass. You made this happen. You chose to be the way you are, trapped, manipulated, insane. Curze's smile froze, seeming to become detached from the face that wore it, hovering menacingly about his lips as a thing unique to itself, before it collapsed with all the violence of a dying star, and his mouth became a screaming hole. No! You sent assassins to kill me! You want me dead! You determined what fate you trod. Your belief, my son, is nothing but an excuse for your own failings. No! Wailing, Curze threw aside his book and hurled himself into the dreadful light, though it burned his eyes and beat at the effigy, rending and tearing at it with broken black nails, peeling long curls of frozen flesh from the stitched carcasses, ripping it to bloody shreds. The light went out. Shaking, sobbing, he collapsed to the floor. The last remnant of his sculpture rolled wetly from the throne. I cannot be forgiven, he whispered. Tears coursed down his face, dripping from his nose and chin, insufficient in their profusion to dilute the blood spilled upon the floor. After all I have done, where would be the justice in that? I had no choice. I had no choice. The pressure dissipated. Curze hunched down to the floor and wrapped his arm around the ruin of his substituted father. Frozen in a half embrace, he waited for a voice that he would never hear again. Blessedly, the torment of Curze's life would end shortly after this. The retribution from the Imperium would come in the form of a Calidus assassin, Shen, who would take the Primarch's head and attempt to escape, though she would be stopped and slain by Talos, the apothecary of First Claw, 10th Company. She had succeeded in her duty regardless. Curze was dead, his pain was finally at an end, and his sons, like true Nostramans, stole all they could from their father, trinkets and baubles to back up their claims to power in the vacuum that followed. Konrad Curze was a troubled soul from inception to end. Nostramo was a world of horrors and darkness that Curze would allow to enter himself. Curze would live and die in constant torment, the visions that afflicted him torturing his mind even as it degenerated under the weight of his sins. Resigned to fate, he allowed himself to be guided by the darkest whims and visions that entered his mind, assured that he was powerless to make different choices. This resignation in the face of fate is the true tragedy of his life.